get the recording going. So anyone who can't attend live because of family, dogs, so on and so forth, they can still catch the recording and learn all of the wonderful things. Cool. So can I have you give us a brief introduction of yourself before we share the screen with the slides and go on that adventure?
Sure. Let's see. How far back do we want to go? I don't want to date myself too much here, but my freelance writing career started actually on September 11th, 2001. I
Oh,
was working in New York. I was working at a legal publisher and came out of the subway to go to work one day and turned around and disaster in process. And it was really sort of a wake-up call. And I just decided, this is not really what I'd want to do with my life. What I really have always wanted to do is write. And so I went back home and I dug out an old novel that I had been trying to get published for literally a decade before that, but had never really focused on. And really just made that my career for about a year. And took classes, did some things like this, joined a writing group, accountability, something we'll be talking about. But after that, I knew I had a really good book. And sure enough, I reached out to a handful of agents. One of them said, I love this, send me the rest of it. He read the whole thing over a weekend, called me on the Monday and said, I want to represent this. And he ended up getting me a 4-book deal with HarperCollins. And that was kind of like the beginning of my career as a novelist. So I've been at it for many years now, have about 25, 6, 7, I've kind of lost count, books in print, books for myself on my own ideas, books I've written with and for other people as a ghostwriter. And I'm stepping a foot into screenwriting now as well. And I'm happy to share any knowledge I have with Roadmap students.
awesome. Oh my gosh, I love it. I love that you've lost count of the number of books
Yeah, I think it's about 26 or 7. I think that's right. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Goals right there. Goals right there, especially if you are like many of us and struggle to get through one of them.
Discipline and having this be your only job. Money is a motivator. I mean, you're going to have to produce if you're going to stay solvent as a freelancer. So yes, yeah.
That's true. All right, cool. Well, let's share the screen with the slides. Present. Presenting. All right, cool. Well, everybody, we are here for Write Your Novel in 2020, hosted by Karyn. So if that is not the session you signed up for, now is the time to find the correct link and join the session you signed up for. Cool. All right. And then Ms. Karyn, just let me know whenever you're ready for me to click over to the next one.
All right. Well, I'll try not to insult everyone's intelligence by reading what's on the slide, but basically I would expect that, you're all here, we're all here because there's a story that you want to tell. And I think for a lot of people, that's one of the bucket list goals, life goals, is to write this novel, to tell this story. But as Alex alluded to, part of the problem is really just getting started. And it seems very daunting. And I think especially in these times when, Amazon has made it so easy for almost anyone to write any kind of book, it can almost seem like overwhelming. Where do I start? Should I be focusing more on the market? Should I be focusing more on my story? How is it different from screenwriting? I know a lot of you are active screenwriters. So that's kind of the things that I wanted to focus on today. And, the main thing though, as is true with any project, is you just have to start somewhere and keep going. So I'm going to talk about some tech tips and some techniques and some things that I do to keep me going in the face of lack of discipline and writer's block and, plot points and, not sure what my character is about and so on and so forth. So that's what we'll be talking about today. And Alex, you can advance. All right, I kind of talked about this just now in my overview, and that is that, but I do want to be a bit more specific. My experience is mainly in commercial fiction, and that to me encompasses romance, women's fiction, science fiction, murder mysteries, spy novels. YA is a genre commercial fiction. To a lesser degree, some what are they're calling creative nonfiction, which is historical or memoirs that are written as though they were novels. To a lesser degree, that's covered. What is not covered is literary fiction, which is a different animal altogether. If you aspire to that, congratulations, because I think it's another whole level. It's just, to me, it's not what I do. It's not what I do. So that is going to be a little bit out of the scope. I can answer a few questions about it just because I do know some people who are in that world and may be able to at least offer some advice secondhand. But what I really know is what they call commercial fiction. And those are the genres: science fiction, romance, mystery, thriller, spy novels, historicals, YA to a degree. So that's what we're going to be talking about. We'll talk about character, we'll talk about structure, we're going to talk about scheduling and how you get it actually done after you start. And again, I'll stick a toe in the world of marketing and publishing and what's going on with all of that, although that's kind of a webinar in and of itself. So, Alex? Yeah. All right, I've told you a little bit about myself. It's 26 or 27 books. I'm showing you my breakdown. A lot of YA. I have a client that I've written several YA books for, an educational publisher called Townsend Press. Just turned in another novel for them earlier, late last year. I've done a lot of ghostwriting as well, including some fiction for some reality stars who were hot for a minute and wanted to have a novel out. I could tell you some of them. I can't tell you all of them. And I also work with writers all the time. I've started several writer groups in the DC area where I live. And it's one of my favorite things because, you know, this is how I've made a career in the last 20 years or so. And I really love it. So happy to share. All right, so with that introduction behind us, let me begin to tell you about the process of writing a novel. So, ta-da! To me, there are three major phases. The planning phase, the writing phase, and the selling phase. And we're really going to be focusing on the first two because, to be honest, in the current market, you're not going to be selling unless you've already written an entire book. If your aspirations are to the big 6 major New York publishers, you need an agent, and an agent is not going to be able to sell your partial. They're going to need for your entire book to be ready in order to approach the publishers. And approaching the publishers is a lot like sending your screenplay blindly to a studio. They're not going to accept it. It's not going to get read. It's going to go immediately into a delete pile. So we'll talk more about that intermediary step of finding an agent, not unlike finding a manager or an agent in screenwriting. But our major focus is writing this book this year, having the finished project. So we're going to talk mainly about the planning phase and the writing phase. Okay. Now, again, I'm assuming some of this audience is screenwriters who are looking to write a novel. And so I'm going to allude to some of the ways that you can use your screenwriter skills to plan out your novel. And if you're not a screenwriter and you're just a novelist, still be able to explain how that would work for you. All right, so, but first, the differences from screenwriting. Obviously, you're going to have to set up in words what would be done in pictures in a screenplay. And in screenplays, a lot of the times, minimalism is key. Obviously, that's not going to work for a novel. So you're going to need to describe the world. You're going to need to describe things in more detail, obviously, than you would in a screenplay. The trick is doing that without weighting down the story. And it does take some practice, especially when you're jumping between the two worlds. So, you know, in a screenplay, you'd get dinged if you were to describe, you know, every detail of a character's dress or, you know, the prints on the curtains and all, you know, these kinds of things in the background that are going to be left to other collaborative professionals. The director will set a vision for the entire piece, and then there will be costume designers who will think about the wardrobe and what makes sense for this character, and the actor will put their own spin on how they move in them. But as a novelist, all of that is for you to set. Now, with that said, I have read, and indeed I have written, novels with too much detail. I have written, especially early in my career, and one of the reasons I was having trouble getting published before I quit altogether and really started going to school for this and trying to really go to workshops and listen to people talk and read more. I have written novels where I tried to describe the flowers scent outside on the lawn, and the every fading finger of sunset, and the handbags that the characters carried, and it's enticing, and you are trying to structure a whole world. So sometimes that matters, but sometimes it doesn't. And the main thing that I think that screenwriters who are trying to become novelists have an advantage on, and that really helped me when I was first learning how to write a novel, is that screenwriters already know that you only have a certain number of pages and you have to move the plot forward within that structure. Novelists tend to think that we can go on as long as we like, so we can get into all these little nooks and crannies and details and so on and so forth. And you can, but if it doesn't matter, and if it doesn't really move the plot forward, that can become a real disaster area. And it will weight the story down, and it will end up getting you rejected by the time you'd want to get to a literary agent or to a publisher. So the balance here is to find what are the details that set the world, the scenery, the background, the details about the character that are important enough to describe in detail, and which are the ones that, while they're nice and they'd be interesting, and maybe some of your best writing, aren't necessarily critical to moving the plot forward. I think one of the best ways that people who want to write novels can learn how to do this is to become more avid readers. And I'm always surprised when I meet people who say they want to write books but don't read them. The best way to see how that balance is handled is to really just go after your favorite authors and see how they manage detail and description and overview versus getting that plot moving. The more you read, the more you can kind of get a sense of where that balance is. Now, reading in and of itself for a novelist can be a challenge. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be reading, quite the opposite, but what? So if you are trying to write horror, it's good to read Stephen King and other horror novelists, but you have to be careful with that because you don't want their style to impact yours. So sometimes, for example, when I'm writing a lot of YA, I'm really careful about not reading YA. But I still read other novelists in other areas because I'm always trying to look for, what are they doing? What's their technique? How do they manage this critical balance between detail and keeping the plot moving? How do they manage the craft, the detail of this expository details about the character or the character's background? How do they bring that in? So read. Maybe not in the genre that you're trying to write, but reading is, as they used to say, fundamental. It's really critical for writers to read. Just as it's critical for screenwriters to read screenplays, it's really critical for novelists to read novels. So if you're not in the habit of reading a lot of novels right now, but you're in the process of outlining a story, I would say, who did you used to like to read? Go to the library, well, I guess we won't be going to the library, but, order a couple of books from Amazon, order a couple of the bestsellers that are maybe not in your usual reading field, and see how much detail they include and where it shows up. Because another mistake is to try to set the world up in the very beginning scenes instead of letting little pieces of it drip in where it's supposed to. And again, takes practice. There's no one way to do it. There's no easy way to describe it, but reading other people helps you get a sense of ways that it can be done. And perhaps you'll find an echo of your own style in reading someone else. So that's my recommendation. But that's the major difference from screenwriting. And for a non-screenwriting novelist, beginning novelist, it's still relevant. You got to read to write. It's just the truth. All right, so I've covered a lot of that. One of the things I didn't talk about, though, is, okay, I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to tell a story. Okay, so I gave you guys the overview about how I really decided that, you know, I really want to be a writer and I really need to stop doing other things and really try to focus on being a writer. And I was fortunate enough that I had some resources set aside at the time. And I was able to really just like take a year and try to learn how to be a novelist. So at the time, Roadmap didn't exist. There were a few online sources where writers were posting stuff and teaching each other. And one of them was American Zoetrope. I don't know if that's, I think it's still around, but in a very different way. I think it's called All Story now or something like that. And it was mainly for flash fiction, but it was also for screenwriters. And I was taking a workshop at like a local community center type thing. It was something that was easy and available. And one of the people in that group was also on Zoetrope and was trying to write screenplays. And she said to me, you know, your ideas are really, really good, but you're just all over the place. You've got way too much detail. You don't seem to have an arc for your characters. And at the time I was kind of like, arc? I'm just trying to tell a story. What are you talking about? And she said, you know, maybe you should take the screenwriting workshop. It really has helped me with structure. And at first I was kind of like, I'm trying to be a screenwriter. Why would I want to do that? But I figured, well, you know, I said I was going to take everything and try to learn everything I could. I have nothing to lose. It was inexpensive. I'm going to go take this workshop. That, for me, to be honest, was a defining moment in my writing career, because trying to condense all of my ideas and all of my brilliant descriptions and my, you know, my detailed character plotting into 120 pages, because that was the standard then. Now I know it's, you know, 100. But from someone who had been used to writing these sprawling 450-page novels, to try to tell a story in 120 pages in just critical points of the plot that made the character get to the end was a light bulb moment. And so that really helped me realize how much extraneous detail I had in my work. And that's one of the reasons that I say that I think in one way, people who are used to the constraints of screenwriting have a small advantage in that they're used to trying to keep the plot moving. They're used to the language of, does this event trigger my character to his next or her next event to keep the story moving? Because if you're writing commercial fiction, that's relevant. Commercial fiction moves by plot. Usually, if you think about your favorite, whatever your genre is, there's something happening. And indeed, some of the most successful commercial fiction writers don't do a lot of description either. It's dialogue and it's plot. It's constantly moving. So the character has to be changing and growing with every scene, much like screenwriting. The plot has to be tight, much like screenwriting. There's not a lot of extraneous events, much like screenwriting. The challenge then is to choose the right words to build the world and the description in a way that screenwriters don't have to do. So if you are a screenwriter participating in this workshop, some of the same things that you do when you're trying to figure out a screenplay are relevant here. You just need to make sure that you're reading enough novels and thinking about description differently, because that's the place where it's different. If you're a novelist who doesn't write screenplays, I would say that it can be very useful to read a few screenplays, even if you don't go take a whole workshop on it, but certainly Roadmap is going to offer you all kinds of places where you could kind of get that brief exposure, which is basically what I did. I got some brief exposure. I wrote maybe 2 or 3 screenplays just to see if I could do it. And they were terrible, but that they were 120 pages for a person who was used to writing 400. So that was very instructive. So I would encourage you to maybe take a look at that particularly if you're struggling with how do I figure out my plot? How do I lay out this narrative? How do I figure out the plot? Screenwriting is very helpful for that for the novelist. All right, we can move on. Okay, so we're on to our planning techniques, because I've kind of alluded a little bit to the different places that screenwriting and novel writing are different. But either way, you're going to have to do some planning to start your novel. And just as in screenwriting, there are 2 schools on this. Some people go very deep into planning the character driven. The character drives the events. And other people are more driven by the events themselves. And you can kind of tell that in a book when you read it, whether it is that you fall in love with the character and what the character is going through, and then you want to walk with that character through the plots that they go through. That would be more of a character planned novel. Plot planning, obviously, is you just want to see what happens. And both can be very successful. But they are different techniques. They're different schools about what's the most important thing. So we'll talk briefly about both of them and some of the resources that I have used. I'm turning my pages here, so pardon my finger. That I have used to depending on the kind of novel that I was working on. Thank you, Alex. Okay, so if you're doing a character-driven novel, if your novel is dependent upon this one character that we're going to follow, now obviously there are going to be other characters in the story, but this one character's point of view that we're going to be following, this one character's journey, then these are the techniques that are going to be most important to you before you actually start writing. So I've written on this slide, who are these people? Because if you don't know who your people are, you're not going to get very far. And you're going to quickly run into writer's block, which we're going to talk about more later. But it just makes sense if you know that the character is going to drive the story, to spend the time at the beginning on really coming to know that person. So just like a screenplay, you know, I assume that you know what a breakdown is, but a breakdown basically would be, you know, how old are they? What race are they? What gender are they? Do they have any distinguishing characteristics? You know, if you were casting this character, what do they look like? What's the image? What's the actor? That can be really helpful. Helpful for screenwriter, but helpful for a novelist too, because if you can imagine someone in your head as this character as you're working, it sometimes makes it easier to figure out how they would respond to a plot point, what they would say, dialogue, how they are going to interact with the other characters, whether they're the wild and crazy one who's going to always be the focus of the humorous moment, whether they're going to get angry. Having an image in your mind is really helpful. And that image can be an actor, or it can be somebody you know. I mean, that I have done many, what I call down here on this slide, direct experience characters. They are loosely based on people in my world that you pull out some of the main characteristics from, and you use that as the springboard to the character. For me, they're almost always some version of myself in one way or the other. And that works too. I mean, they say write what you know, and that's basically what you're doing. You're writing from the people in your world, or you're writing from yourself. But that breakdown, what do they look like? What is their background? All of that belongs somewhere in a journal, notebook, file. I've even seen people take pieces of white paper and paste them to their walls and write down kind of a timeline of what happened to this character before the novel begins. Sometimes that's really helpful because you may end up wanting to harken back to a past event or have it inform an element of plot. And knowing that about your character ahead of time is really, really useful. Like an actor's preparation, for example. It's also, you got to know where this character is going. It doesn't necessarily have to be down to every blink and every turn, but at the very minimum, before you start writing the novel, you have to know what's the major turning point that this character is headed toward. What are going to be some of the major obstacles that they're going to have to deal with before the ending? And most of us know where we think it ends when we start. So having at least some kind of idea or outline or note cards or questionnaires. I've seen people do that too, where they try to take quizzes online as the character or answer 100 questions from some personality test as the character. I say I've seen people do that. I don't do that. I actually have some problems with this. I do, as I said, the direct experience, and I do some kind of breakdown, and I always know what the character's arc is. But again, we were talking about details earlier. We were talking about how you can get in the weeds with details. I have tried to do quizzes and questionnaires, and I have tried to do timelines. But for me, that didn't work as well because I found myself getting locked into thinking about things that probably didn't matter in the novel itself. I know that has worked brilliantly for other people though. So, I offer it because we're all different, and what doesn't work for me might really help you understand who your character is, get a better sense of what they might say and do, inform the way, because you know things about their past that may not be relevant to this particular story, they will inform the way you write their dialogue. It really can work. It just doesn't work for me for whatever reason. I tend to get really lost in those details and end up wanting to write a very different book than the one that I started with. So I just try to get a general sense of what the character's arc is, what their experience is. I don't even necessarily always have like a look or a person in mind that I'm writing from, unless it's I've done that with some for hire projects where it was obvious that the client saw themselves in that role, and that I would obviously write as though they were the lead, smart, right? So if this works for you, or if you find yourself stuck, it's always good to have more tools in your box than you necessarily always choose to use. So if you can't get going with just sort of a general outline or writing as though you were your mom or whoever the main character is supposed to be, you might want to pull out some of these and see if it's useful for you to do some sort of timeline. It's useful for you to take a few online quizzes or to answer questions, a series of questions, because that might break that block for you. And in a character-driven novel, you really, really need to have that character as close to you as possible, to really be able to feel and think and write as that character. In my experience, once you find the character, this becomes less of a problem because, crazy writer talk, the character takes you over anyway and begins to be so integrated with your process that the character will start to tell you, I wouldn't do that. That's you. I wouldn't say that. That's you imposing, your brain imposing on my story. Yeah, crazy, but it happens. So somebody has something to say on that one. Thank you. All right, so let's move on to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about planning through the use of plot. Okay. Obviously, even in a character-driven novel, you're going to need to have a sense of your overarching plot. Where is this character going? Where does this end? What is their major turning point? Who or what are the obstacles along the way? But if you're writing a plot-driven novel, and by that I mean it's cliffhangers, it's the characters are racing to accomplish a certain mission, to get to an end, to unravel a mystery. Those are plot-driven storylines that the characters are important. You want to go on that journey with them, but what happens to them is what keeps you turning the pages. I'm a big fan of plot-driven stuff. I mean, maybe it's because I watch too much TV, I don't know, but I really like to read for myself things where I am always guessing what's going to happen next. And that requires real planning, because you literally have to know, if not every scene, because again, in novel writing, scenes can be a bit more fluid, a bit longer. A scene can be a chapter. You certainly have to know chapter by chapter where you're headed and how that leads to the next thing, that leads to the next thing, that leads to the next thing, that leads to the big climax, that leads to the end. So I think for a plot-driven novel, you really do have to kind of outline it. You really do have to kind of know before you start, or at least have a general sense of where the plot is going in each bit. So again, I'm hesitant with scene by scene, although you could think of it that way, because a chapter can be a scene. Chapters can be as long as short as you want. You can choose to structure that in any way you like. But for me, I would say what I would do, and what I often do, is I know in every chapter what has to happen to bring me to the next chapter and to bring me to the end. So I kind of have a chapter outline. Now, I'm going to back up a bit, because the word outline triggers a lot of people. Okay, so because I have been doing this as a job for a number of years, it is not uncommon to have a client ask for the outline. How is this novel going to look? How is my book going to come out? What is my book going to be about? And that is an outline, basically. So it's not your, cat numeral, Roman numeral 1 period. It's not that kind of thing. It's usually some sort of treatment, synopsis, several paragraphs or several pages of what this book is going to be about, what the major peaks are, what the characters are going to encounter, where the obstacles are going to lie, and how it's going to all work out in the end. For the record, I hate outlining. I absolutely hate outlining. I hate writing synopses. I hate writing treatments. I hate having to do that. It is not my favorite thing. And I'm not always sure that it works for me in the way that you'd think it would. Because there's a school of us out there who are more what we call organic writers. Okay, so here's what happens when I write an outline. In fact, I just had to do this. I had this client, Townsend Press. I write YA books for them. They are all interconnected, and the publisher needs to know what I'm going to do, because he's got other freelance writers working on other stories with the same characters in this high school. And if my character goes off and does something weird, it might impact the book that they have coming out about another character who plays a peripheral role in my story. So I have to do it. I cannot tell you how many times I have written an outline and then written a totally different book. There is something about too detailed of an outline feeling constricting, and taking away the creativity and flow that I really struggle with. Fortunately, I'm able to bring it close enough to what I said I was going to do, not to get fired. But that's kind of, I tell this story because it's kind of the problem with outlining too rigidly, because we're creative people and we have to be able to kind of let that inspiration in and not be just slaves or tools to a certain process. So what I do for my own books that are not for hire and not, not for clients and don't have the need for the same structure, is really, I put very little on paper, but I know that I have a beginning, a sense of what the chapters will accomplish, and an end. So I am the last thing on this list, I am a beginning, muddle, and end writer. I know strong where it starts. I know strong where it ends. I know that each chapter is going to have to hit a certain mark to keep people turning the pages. At the start of every chapter, at least, if not a couple chapters before I start writing it, I have a sense of what the highs and lows of that chapter will be. But I try not to lock myself into a certain story, because I have to leave room for what I said earlier, and that is the characters speak and they change it. And a rigid outline does not leave room for that creative process. So planning is very important. Planning is critical. You have to know where this book is going, or where you think this book is going. You have to know where you think this character's highs and lows are going to be. You have to know what the arc is. You have to know the beginning and the middle and the end, or the muddle and the end. But for some people, that's going to be a very, very detailed process, and they're not going to have any problem. And it's going to be very helpful for them to walk through it scene by scene by scene, and to have all of that written down, so that when they sit down to write, the only thing that they're trying to focus on is, how do I describe this? How do I lay this out in the best possible way? And if that's you, then scene by scene is going to be the way to go. For other people, having a more general sense so that they know the major points of each chapter is going to be very useful. And then when they sit down to write, they're going to be focused on listening to the character and getting that structure and that description level right. And that's going to be sufficient. And for others of us, sometimes it's really going to have to be more flexible than that. And we're going to have to rely more on a sense of character, but also on that daily practice, that routine, that I'm going to get through this story come hell or high water, and I'll fix it at the end, because too stringent of an outline boxes in our creativity. So with that said, it's really time to talk about how all of this planning works out once you're actually writing. So Alexandra, please. Now, on this page, I have written what I consider to be the most important rule of writing. Writing is rewriting. And I think for some people, that's it's a groan. It's a, I just want to get it done. It's hard enough to get it done without having to think about redoing it. But I really think in a lot of ways that's very liberating, because it takes the pressure off of trying to make it perfect on the first go. Because it's not gonna be. It's just not gonna be. Very few of us are able to just sit down and write a great novel on the first draft. I hear there are some who do it, but most of us don't write that way. Most people don't write that way. And again, I find it liberating, because I think if you go into it knowing that this isn't going to be good, I just need to get something on paper. It doesn't have to be good. I'm going to rewrite it. I'm going to rewrite it 3 times. then it's a very different feeling about that first draft. It's like, it can suck, and I'm free to let it suck. And I just need to keep going. I just need to keep going. If writing is rewriting, and you know that going in, I think you can let yourself off the hook about a lot of struggles that you're likely to have as you try to get your book done. So I hope that's helpful for you, as it is for me. It truly is the one thing that keeps me going, because, writer's block is real. Trouble with the discipline of sitting in the chair and actually getting done, that's real. This is difficult. But knowing that I'm going to go back over it again later enables me to take all kinds of crazy risks and chances and just plow through and basically write crap, which leads me to the next slide. All right, so I know many of you have heard of the crap draft, or the vomit draft, some people call it, and it is a very popular technique. It is the technique that I personally use. I really think for most of us, it's the best way to actually finish a book. And it literally is kind of a race or game with yourself, to just belch out a bad novel as quickly as possible. So I say 30 to 60 days. I've done it faster than that because sometimes I've had to, but for our purposes here at Roadmap in this webinar, I'd say give yourself 30, 60, 90 days, something like that. Whatever is comfortable, but just give yourself that period of time and just keep going. And I'm not including, planning in that, though you could, because I would say plan it to the best of your ability using whatever technique works for you, and then just start. Just start. No excuses. No, I need to work on the planning a little bit longer, because that's another trap. No, I just want to wait and read one more book. Sometimes you just have to say, all right, go. And for me, that always works. It's sort of like, okay, in fact, I'm actually working on something right now, and I need to have 60 pages on it done by the 15th of April. And I'm working on other stuff too, so this is not like my only thing. So I want to have 60 pages done on this thing by the 15th of April. So I basically given myself a month to carve out time to do this new project, or enough of this new project to show that it's going. And what I'm going to do is exactly what I'm recommending here. Is I've set a deadline, and I am going to keep going no matter what. That means if I write 10 pages and I suddenly decide that the main character has to be a male instead of a female, I change her name, his name to her name, or her name to his name, whichever one I just said. I change the name and I keep going. I do not go back to the beginning and make her a him. She becomes a he on page 10 and forward. No going back. I don't start the day of writing by rereading what I wrote yesterday any more than it takes to remember where I left off. And probably I remember anyway, so I don't read any of it. I just start where I left off and I keep going. If the plot, suddenly a plot hole makes it obvious to me that I cannot write this story that way, and that now I really need to incorporate 6 new characters in a different destination with a different arc altogether, I don't go back to the beginning. I start with the changes exactly where I realized them. I write as though the new characters had been there all along. They are in medias res, as they called it in Latin. They're in the middle of the story. They are jumping in as though they have always been there. And this new plot is going to take off as though I had been writing it all along. I will not go back and try to set up that plot. Nope, that's for rewriting. That's for rewriting. And I will keep going until I meet that goal, or until I have a whole book. And I've recommended, if you're trying to write a 60, 80,000 word novel, you might need 30, 90 days, 30, 60, 90 days, something like that, depending on what your schedule is. Maybe you need 120. I don't know. That depends on how often you can write and what your daily goal is. But you work on it every day. You meet that page goal every day, and you do not go back. And the reason I really want you all to think about this, I have known too many writers, good writers, or at least their first 20 pages was amazing, who never get to page 25 because they spend all of their time going back over the first 20 pages, correcting and tweaking and massaging and loving those first 20 pages. And they're beautiful, but there's no book. There's no book. You have to keep going. Even if you love the first 20 pages, even if they suck, it doesn't matter. You have to keep going. And so to prevent that trap, speed. Fix it later, fix it later, fix it later, fix it later. My two mantras, I said, let your mantra be on this slide, I'll fix it later. The other mantra is, I know this sucks. I know this sucks. Oh, this sucks. I say that to myself constantly when I'm writing a crap draft or a vomit draft. It's like, I know. This is garbage. This is stupid. This is terrible. I'll fix it later. I'll fix it later. I'll fix it later. So it's like this inner dialogue that's going, you can do better. Yes, I know. I'll fix it later. This is outlandish. Yes, I know. I'll fix it later. So I highly recommend it. It really does work. It really does work if you can commit to it. So Alex, next slide, because I'm kind of already into that a little bit. All right, so the advantage is obvious. You're going to get a first draft written if you can stick to this. If you can avoid the temptation to go back and fix stuff that you know is wrong, you will get a first draft. You will also know what your weaknesses are because they're going to become painfully obvious. As I said, when I do this, it very quickly comes to me, oh crap, that plot sucks. I need to go this direction. Oh no, that character would never do that. This is not where they belong. Oh my gosh, I've wanted to make this a woman. It really has to be a guy. Okay, so you see where your weaknesses in your planning are. Again, why you don't want to get mired in your planning. You need a plan, but it needs to be a flexible plan. Because when you start writing, and you start writing this crap draft and you start going quickly through the story, the stuff shows up. Oh no, that's not going to work. I need to change this. I need another character. This character can't be that way in this story. So it quickly shows you what's not going to work. You just have to avoid the temptation to go back and fix it, and then just try to keep going. And then you can also search for feedback and resources, and another trap. I'll tell quick stories again. Another trap here too is that we get like, oh my gosh, I'm going to make this new character and she's an international spy. I don't know anything about that. Let me get on Google and find out. I try not to do that either. Yes, there's going to be research. If you come up with a character that has a background that you know nothing about, but you realize that's the character that now needs to be in the story, you're going to have to do some research, but you're not going to do it right now. You're going to write this draft first, and you're just going to make shit up. Sorry, uncensored truth. Make shit up. And then when you rewrite, you can go back and find out what they really do. But for now, the internet, Googling, researching, it sounds like you're doing something, but you're really just avoiding writing this draft. So, and really kind of, in my opinion, creating problems for yourself, because you start thinking, okay, well, I've learned from the CIA site that this is the way this goes, or I've interviewed this person who works in the prisons and that's how that really goes. And that doesn't really fit with the story that I wanted to tell. So now I don't know what to do. It's better if you write the story first And then when you go interview people, hey, it's a novel. When you go interview people, you listen to what they say, or you go do your research and you find out all these things. And you're like, what can I use? I already have this. How real do I want this to be? I'm not saying, screw reality. I'm just saying, I think that can easily become a trap that people fall into, and they feel like, oh, I need to make this accurate. I need to go get research done. And the next thing you know, you're spending all this time researching and you're not writing anything. Writing is the most important thing. Writing is the most important thing. One more time. Writing is the most important thing. You have to be writing it or you won't have a book. You have to be writing it or you won't have a book. Writing is the most important thing. So get a draft on paper. If it helps you, do what I do. I tell myself, this sucks. This is the worst thing you've ever done. And then I say, I'll fix it later. So when that thought comes into your head, oh my gosh, I don't know what I'm doing. This sucks. It's the worst thing I've ever done. You can think of me and you can say, I'm going to fix it later. Or I'll get help to fix it later, because that's something we're going to talk about too, is there's resources that, you get something, you get stuck, you can find some help. But you can't find anything if you don't have a book. So you got to get it on paper one way or the other. Okay, so there's the advantages. The disadvantages is it's going to need rewriting, but we've accepted that. We accepted that when we sat down to write in the first place. Discipline is important if you're going to do this technique. And we're going to talk some more about that. Discipline, it requires discipline. If discipline is a weakness, this will be difficult. And it will be a muscle that you're going to need to keep exercising. And as I've said, it's not a comfortable feeling to know that you're blasting through something that has all kinds of problems that you need to research, that it's not very good, and to keep doing it. I mean, most of us, when we realize that something's not going well, stop. That's kind of a normal human reaction. But in this case, I really think it's the best way to actually get a novel on paper if you can accept that you're just going to suffer through this first draft. You're just going to suffer through this and then work on it more later. All right, let's move ahead. Okay, so we're going to talk about discipline now. I hope that you are all naturally disciplined individuals. I mean, I think it helps if there's a part of you somewhere in your life that already has a healthy respect for a routine, whether that's, you're working out every day, or if you pray every day, whatever your thing is, that you do with some level of religiousness. You need that same technique. You need that same chutzpah, that same guts, that same drive to apply to your book. And there are a lot of different ways that you can do it. I given like 3 ways, but to me, these are all the same. So I say daily pages. Okay, I got a 60 pages. I want to do 60 pages of a new story. I'm not trying to write the whole book right now. I have too many other things going right now, but I want to get 60 pages because this is something I want to do. So that means over the next month, 30 days or so, I need to write 2 pages a day. And if I'm going to take off a day, a week or 2 a week, I may need to write 3 or 4 pages a day. So it's like a daily page goal to get that done. You take your novel, you think it's an estimated, I don't know. You don't even have to know how many pages it's going to be. You just say to yourself, I'm going to try to get done 3 or 4 pages a day, 5 pages a day. I think 5 pages a day is doable if your novel is your only project. I think it's really hard to do 5 pages a day and have other responsibilities. So set a 2 or 3 page a day goal. 2 or 3 pages a day. What is that? 500, 750 words, something in that range. You'll have a 70,000 word novel in about 3 months if you did that. If your story is shorter, obviously you'll have a book sooner. But if you can think of it that way, if I just write 2 pages, if I just wrote 2 pages a day, I would have a book in 3 months' time. If I wrote 10 pages a week, I could have, what is that? 7 to 8 weeks. You'd have 70, 80,000 words, something like that. Less. Or you give yourself a date certain. I will have my first draft done by, I think right now it's reasonable to say 3, 4, 5, 6 months, something like that, depending on how much time you have, and how long you think the book will be. And most of us won't know. I mean, if you're writing a book, as sometimes I have done, for a client who has specific page guidelines, then you know. But most of us just need to tell the story in as many pages as it takes to tell the story, as well as we can tell the story in a craft draft. So it might be really short in a craft draft because there's so many things that you realize you don't know that you're going to have to go back to later. That's okay. Don't feel like it has to be, the full 80,000 words or 60,000 words. It can be 30,000 words if it tells you what you're going to need to work on to make it the final book. So just set whatever kind of goal works for you. Now, with that said, please don't set a goal that's impossible. We go to these workshops, and I have done this. I go to a workshop and I get all excited and I'm like, okay, I'm going to get to work. And then I set myself some, outrageous goal. And I do this a lot. Even now I do this. I set myself some goal I can never reach. I set myself some, I'm going to write a chapter a day, 9, 10, 12, 15 pages. And I've done it. It's hard. It's hard even when there's money on the line. It's hard. It's hard. It's much more comfortable and encouraging to take the tortoise approach and to just kind of slow and steady wins ways. I know I can do 2 pages a day. I know I can do 2 pages a day. All I have to do is set aside an hour, hour and a half. Chances are good I'm going to have been thinking about this all day long, so I'm going to have a good idea of what I need to write next. Once I start, I can do 2 or 3 pages a day. Set a realistic goal for yourself based on your life, based on your circumstances, based on your experience, based on what else you have going on. Don't set yourself up for failure by setting a goal that's not realistic. Set yourself up for success by saying, hey, in 3 months, I'm going to have this half done. In 6 months, it's going to be done. And I'm going to write 2 pages a day, or I'm going to write 10 pages a week, or something like that. And if you end up writing all 10 pages on Saturday or Sunday, because that's when you have the most time, that works. Don't box yourself in any way, keep it flexible. Allow the creativity. Allow what works in your life. But make sure you do it. Whatever goal you set, make it reasonable, but also keep to it. And if you miss, then you just need to make it up. It is as important as any other thing that you're doing. It is a commitment that you have made. It is something that you intend to accomplish. And so it can't be, well, I missed 2 pages this week. I'm just, not ever going to get this done. You can't give up. I miss 2 pages all the time. I usually set myself like this 2-page goal, and I miss them all the time. And then I end up, okay, I am now 6 pages behind. So on whatever day I don't have as much going on, I will make that up or get as close to making it up as possible. And I'll be honest, I usually run behind. I hope that's helpful for you all to know. I usually am running behind my own goals. I am almost always behind my own goals. I will say to myself, 10 pages a week, and the first week I'll end up with 9. So I'm already behind. And the second week I'll end up with 8. So then I'm 3 pages behind. That kind of works for me because I don't like to be behind. I'm a Virgo. I don't know. I like to, so it kind of works for me that I'm never quite at my goal. I'm never quite complacent. I know I'm a little bit behind. So, but it's not to the point that I'm going to give up because I'm so far behind that I can never catch up either. So it's a discipline thing. It's commitment. So Alex, will you move on to the next one? So this is kind of where we're talking about. We're talking about what works to keep you on track. And that's a knowing yourself thing. That's a psychology thing. My always being a little bit behind works for me because the pressure is always on, and I work well under pressure, and I don't like to be behind. And so it's not deliberate, or at least it's not conscious, but maybe that's part of how I get stuff done for me is I'm a little bit behind. So I need to put the pressure on to stay on target. And for me, when setting a goal and writing it on my calendar is like, in blood, it's like, okay, I got to get that done. Rewards work for a lot of people. If you're a person who likes to work for rewards, set it up. When I get these 50 pages done, when I reach my first milestone, when I finish the crap draft, I'm going to. And it doesn't always have to be a big thing. What's the thing that you look forward to? Whether it's a night out or a manicure or, having drinks with friends or, I don't know, you know what lights your fire and what you look forward to. So that can be a really positive way to encourage yourself to set something up in the distance that you want to have your book or your section done by. A lot of people like the challenges and games, and there are a bunch of sites, and I believe Roadmap has them listed on the author's page. I remember giving a list to Tara at Roadmap about them. So I don't include them on the slide, and I don't have them in front of me, but I know that you guys have them somewhere that can be linked to. There are a lot of sites that offer, you sign up to join, and they are accountabilities, or if you get your certain, you play games to try to get your pages done. National Novel Writing Month is certainly one of them. It's in November, so it's already passed or ahead of us still for this year. But, they encourage people to write a 50,000 word novel in a month. And there are all kinds of events associated around it and prizes and all that kind of stuff. So there are some things out there that can, if you're a person who likes to have the challenge aspect and know that you're racing against other people, that can be a very effective way to help you stay disciplined to get something done. And I will try to find that, and I'll send it to Alex too, to maybe link to this later. But yes, there was a list that I developed a while back to help people with finding some of those challenges online. So use your own psychology and try to figure out what works for you to help you stay on track and to commit to really getting this done this year. All right, you can go ahead, Alex. Yes. All right. So accountability partners are critical for just about anything. And I think for the discipline of writing, let's face it, writing is a very solitary and lonely occupation. And it's one thing to set a goal with yourself, for yourself, but it's something else to make that commitment to other people and to say it out loud or to affirm it to a group can be a really great way to stay on track. And if you're even a tiny bit competitive, knowing that you're working with other people and you want to be one of the ones that ends up on the side of I finished it versus the side of I didn't, that's really important. It's important motivation, and that's really what we're looking for here. In addition to all of our planning, it's how do I keep myself going on this? How do I keep going in the loneliness and the isolation of being a writer, or I'm working on this kind of project? So groups are really important. I told you this story about how when I was first starting, I took a bunch of classes and met a bunch of people, and it was really, really helpful. Well, now I think a lot of that is online, and certainly Roadmap is going to be one of the places that you would look for that. But there are other groups, and they're all over the internet. There are classes. There are people that who share the goal of writing a novel. I actually have founded a couple of writing groups because, for selfish reasons, I wanted to have accountability partners. And so I looked around and I was like, who do I know? And, hey, do you want to get together every other Saturday and share some pages? Share some goals? Read each other's stuff? look no further than yourself. If you want to try to start a group, who do you know who might be interested in joining? I think online groups are wonderful, but I also still meet with a group of ladies here in the DC area. We don't meet as much as we used to, but we still do meet once a month or so, or once every 2 months, to go over pages and hold each other accountable for finishing things that we said we were going that we started. So I do think that that is intensely valuable along this road, is to have people that you have opened your big mouth and said, I am going to write a novel to, who are going to look at you and say, so how's the novel coming? And are there any pages for me to read? That's really helpful. I don't let them see the crap draft, but once it gets beyond that, I'm always like eager for feedback. And that's part of the reason for doing it, is the feedback, but also just, you have people out there who are expecting to see you do this. So it keeps you honest. It keeps you disciplined. It keeps you on it. So, and certainly, the online communities like Roadmap, there are others. I will find that list and I give it to Alex to be uploaded at the end of the session. But, Roadmap and others are going to be places where you can find people that will help you, who are sharing your goals and who have similar interests and can help you stay accountable. You can hire a writing coach. I do a little bit of that. There are lots of us out there who know something about story and can kind of help you set your schedule and get rolling and help you to fight the battle against yourself and your own procrastination, if that's one of your issues, as well as offer advice about, how you're doing what you're doing and better ways to do it. So certainly research and look into as many of those as possible. You got to have somebody. You got to have somebody. I really think that's true. I don't know if I would have finished that first book had I not had those little community classes. It wasn't like I went for a creative writing degree. I was living in New York, and I was living in the Bronx, and I was at the Bronx Writers Workshop almost every week. Nothing, well-known national program. Don't fall into that trap. It doesn't have to be all of that. It literally can be any place where you can have a community with fellow writers and get exposure to different ways that people do things. Very helpful to have people to bounce something off of and to share with. So I would encourage accountability partners as a way to kind of bolster your own discipline and your own techniques and your own psychology, because having people around who are going, where's that novel you said you were going to write, is really helpful when you're struggling. Next one, Alex. All right, so now we've reached everybody's favorite topic, not writer's block, and how to break through it. So, I'm big on my first rules of things. My first rule of writing is rewriting. And my first rule of writer's block is, you're going to get it. Expect it. It's going to happen. It is going to happen. There is no avoiding it. People who say they don't have writer's block just have very sophisticated ways of dealing with it, to the point that it doesn't cripple them. And that is what you want to be. You want to expect it, and you want to develop your own ways of dealing with it and getting around it. So I'm going to offer you my second rule of writer's block, which has worked for me. And I have a sense that there are other writers who basically do the same thing, even if they're not conscious of it or haven't spoken or written about it as a technique. So my second rule is, you need something new. What do I mean? Okay, so you're writing along and you thought you knew where the story was going, and all of a sudden you are in a black hole. The story won't unfold the way you wanted it to unfold. The character won't do what you thought they were supposed to do for the next scene. It feels really wrong, and now you've written yourself into a corner and you don't really know how to get out of it. For those of you who have started some writing, you may have already experienced this. If you haven't actually started your book yet, like I said, expect it. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. So when I say you need something new, what I mean is the outline that you have, the character that you have, everything that you have already thought of for this story is no good. No, it's not that it's no good. It's missing something. Something else needs to happen, be said, appear, something. The old stuff won't work. You need something new. Something's missing. You need something new. And this is literally what I do when I get myself to a place where the character won't move forward with the story that I thought I was telling. And when the outline that I have no longer seems to be what the story needs, I will drop in at that moment the craziest new thing that can come to my head just to see where it goes. A new subplot, a new character. I have switched point of view. I've been telling the story from the woman's point of view, and the next 2-page section is totally from the man's point of view. Whether I keep it or not, it's a crap draft. It doesn't matter. The whole point is to keep moving and to break the block by approaching the thing in a totally different way. A new twist, something you hadn't thought of. I have literally, in a story about high schoolers dealing with the challenges of their dramatic little lives, dropped in aliens. Yes, I have. Did it make it into the final draft? Of course not. That's not what the publisher asked for. But I could not get my head around this character and what he was going through. And so, rather than going back to the outline and trying to figure out how to make the outline, how to make it fit, I was like, okay, this is not working. What if he opened his locker and there was some green glowing glue and, just crazy stuff? And it got me excited. And I wrote maybe 10 or 12 pages of that. And then I was like, oh, wait a minute. In the process of writing all of this crazy alien stuff, I ended up bringing in a bunch of other characters who were like he's bouncing off of. And I like some of these people, and they didn't exist in the novel series before, but I can create new characters for this book, and I can give a character who has a whole story arc in other books in this series new friends. And it really did break the block. Yes, I took out all the crazy stuff, but I didn't take out the people that showed up. And I couldn't get to the people without that crazy idea. Sometimes you can get to the new people without a crazy idea. Sometimes a new character can literally just walk up and say to your character, screw you, or, hello, or I think you're sexy. And then it's like, okay, let's roll with that. And it is unexpected. It is off outline. It is weird. But writing is rewriting, right? So it will break the block because you will be sitting there typing away, laughing at yourself because this is just crazy. And you will be saying to yourself, there's no way I'm keeping this. This is just too weird. This is not the story I'm supposed to be telling. Or maybe you'll be saying, this is it. This is where I was going all along. Thank God writing is rewriting, because it does give you the freedom and enables you to break the block by being as outrageous as your imagination wants to be. And again, I don't go back. So when I dropped the aliens in the story I was telling you, when I dropped the alien line, I just dropped it. And then the next thing that I wrote, the character was hanging out with these new friends following the original plot. When I rewrote it, of course, I took that out. I just made the new friendships apart from the beginning, and we wove in the new arcs with the existing plot line that I had with these new characters that showed up. So be open to busting your preconceived notions about what your book was going to be. Just be open to breaking all that down, because that's going to get you out of the black hole that we all face from time to time when something that we planned doesn't seem to be panning out on the paper. And I honestly think that a lot of writer's block just comes from a sense of getting bored with the story that we're telling ourselves. That's what we're doing. At the end of the day, we're kind of just telling ourselves a story, because we don't know if anybody's ever going to see sometimes the things that we do for the original stuff. So we're telling ourselves a story. So if I'm telling myself a story at this point, I'm open to just about anything. And if I don't want to write it, I wouldn't want to read it. So breaking open my own imagination and pulling out something unexpected and going with it for as many pages as it seems to go until I know what it was for, or until I am not happy with that either and need to kind of loop back to my original plot. The point is to keep writing. What we want to do is keep writing. What we want to do is get that draft on paper. What we want to do is have our finished product at the end of the crap draft period. And if that means you realize that your story is stuck, just change the story any way you want to keep you going. You could fix it later. So expect that to happen and be ready. I mean, it's sometimes nice to have some crazy prompts, just to throw into a story. The aliens is one of my favorite ones. It's kind of like, and then the aliens came down. It's like it's the Deus ex machina in it. It's the unexpected, the God, the machine, and suddenly it was all a dream, that sort of thing. Well, you get the picture. I won't belabor it. But if you take nothing else from that, take it that you can expect you will have some moment of writer's block, and liberate yourself to be crazy. All right, Alex, move on. All right. I said we talk a little bit about this, pitching and selling. I mean, the main focus of this is in the getting it done, and that's what I wanted to mainly tell you all about. But I do want to kind of give you a quick and dirty overview of the current landscape, at least with Big Six publishing, with traditional publishing as they call it now. So we'll talk briefly about some of the things that you need to be aware of if that's a route you want to go, and a little bit about self-publishing in the next section. Okay, so this is not news to anybody. I'm just saying it because we got to say it. And that is, please don't put yourself in the position where you're trying to sell something that's not ready to be sold. And that's such a hard thing, because, we do all this work and then we rewrite it a half dozen times, and then we sit in a drawer, and then we go back and reread it ourselves, and we think we're brilliant and we love it and we think it's great and we're proud, and we should be, because it's hard work. And so we think it's ready, and sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's not. And so that's where your accountability partners are really, really, really invaluable. Because when you get somebody else to read it, somebody who isn't a family member or a really close friend, preferably somebody who reads books, because we need people who are readers to tell us about our books, whether they're on the mark or off. So that takes me right back to, you kind of need to find your tribe on this. You need to have a handful of people who maybe are not necessarily in the industry. I don't know that they have to be fellow novelists, but they have to be readers, and they have to be readers who are not going to shy away from hurting your feelings. So, having that group, having that, maybe that online, I think, Roadmap is a good place where you can be able to pitch or have people read a few pages and give you some feedback. You don't want to send things out to literary agents if they're not ready, because that's another one shot at the apple type thing. And you don't want to burn those bridges. You want it to be great. You want it to be great. It is so competitive. It is so tough out there. You want it to be your very best work. You want it to be unique. You want it to sing, is kind of the word I often use about it. So make sure, as you're building this network, as well as writing your book, that you've got a couple people in there who are dispassionate observers, who will read it and say, this part's great, and this part it's back to the draft on, or, it's still craft draft quality. We need to do a little more work. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the state of the market is that, and I think this is the next slide, but I'll say it now, pitching to a publisher directly is like pitching to a studio directly. If you're a screenwriter, you can't do it. It's just, they're just going to throw it away. No unsolicited queries, no unsolicited manuscripts. So if you're going for big six traditional publishing, you're going to need an agent. There's some databases. I've listed those on the slide. I'm not going to read them. Going to genre conventions is another big way. As I said, we're focusing on commercial fiction here. A lot of commercial fiction is genre. Horror, mystery, I don't think there's a YA, romance. All of them have annual conferences. I highly recommend that you go. If you have a genre book that has a conference, that is a world of education right there. And you will meet literary agents, and you will meet fellow writers, and you will build a tribe, and you will learn a ton. I've been to several, and it's both encouraging and overwhelming how many people there are who are super talented trying to break in. Made some really good friends, learned a lot, and met agents, have met agents. So that is definitely something that is a good place to go if you're trying to find an agent, if you're trying to make connections in a particular genre. And of course, agents have specialties. So as you're looking at the query tracker or litagent.com or any of the other places, they will tell you what they want. They will tell you, send a query, just a query, which means, give us a verbal pitch or a written pitch. They'll tell you, send a sample, which could be a chapter, 30 pages, or a synopsis. Very rarely will they tell you to send a whole book up front, but you want to be very respectful of what they ask for. And I'm sure you would be, but just make sure that you have, when you use these resources for finding an agent, make sure you pay attention to what they say they're willing to read. You don't send an agent who is interested in celebrity memoir, a YA or a children's book. That's the surest way to get your name on a list. No, I'm not kidding. I'm kidding. There's no list. But it's just going to get in the trash. It's a waste of your time and theirs. So don't do that. And I know that Roadmap is also offering opportunities to pitch to literary agents and to, get some opportunities to get read that way. I want to get myself in trouble because I'm not all of that familiar with exactly how that is working. So maybe Alex can speak to that in a little bit. But again, my advice is, I'm not sure that I would pitch anyone until I had at least a good second draft, simply because there was a time, maybe 40 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe even the 80s, 30 years ago, when agents would take on new talent and mentor and work with it and help you bring your novel to the place where it was ready for publication. That does not happen anymore. If it's not quite ready, they're going to tell you it's not quite ready, pass. It's sad, but it's true. So the onus is on us to get it as ready as we can get it and to have something ready to send when you start pitching. I don't know how many people I know, talented people, make this mistake. They go, I have a great pitch session because their ideas and those first 20 pages that they've written are brilliant. And the agent is intrigued and says, send it to me. But there's no book, or the book isn't ready. So don't put yourself in that position. I know it's tempting, and we will want that positive rush when you get somebody who has the power to maybe move it to the next stage interested, but have something there first. That's why it's so critical to just grit your teeth and write that crap draft and just say to yourself, I'll fix it later, and just deal with the blocks and the whatever. Just get through that 30, 60, 90, 120 days that it takes for you to get something on paper. Because at least if you have a good or sucky draft on paper, you have something that can be worked with. You can work with it. Your accountability partners can help you work with it. And then you'll really be able to deliver when you do that great pitching session. But I just think it's really, I just feel bad. I'm thinking of one particular person. I really feel bad. I feel bad because it just needs to be finished. But it's not finished. And then when the agents are actually interested, then you're in a worse position than you were before, because there's all this pressure to try to finish something, and it can't be good when it's that. That's your crap draft. You're under pressure to finish it. It's crap. You know it's crap, and it's going to be crap, and you're going to hand it into an agent, and it's going to be crap, and it's going to get you not only a no, but they probably won't look at you again because you present so well, but you deliver such crap. So don't do that to yourself. All right, next. Okay, yeah, they're not going to take anything unsolicited. So I don't think that there's a whole lot of sense in pitching to publishers directly, unless you know somebody. And if you already have an in with Simon & Schuster, I would exploit the hell out of that. I just make sure that I had something worth their attention and time. I mean, if it's your sister, she might read it for you for the heck of it and give you some feedback along the way. But other than that, I really would be very careful that I wouldn't use a connection unless I knew that I had something that they were going to be able to do something with, or that at least would be something that would be worth their time. So, all right. So, the self-publishing world, just quickly, because that's a whole webinar in and of itself. And I've done it, and lots of people have done it. And I'm going to tell you right now, it is so easy. There is no reason to fear that. Anybody can do it. You could do it. You could do it with your crap draft right now if you want to. It is and people do. People do. If you've read some of the stuff that's out there, it's some of it's alarming. It's not what it should be, in my opinion, as someone who's been trying to learn to write and writing for 20 years. The difficulty really is, though, in finding an audience for your book. And self-publishing, I think, is best when you have an active Twitter following, or you have an interest group that you can target because you're already a member of that community. And for general fiction, I think it can be really, really hard. But I would not discourage you from doing it. You have a lot of control over that process and on those profits. If you're the sort of person who is great at finding ways to sell yourself and to sell your products, it can be a really great avenue to go. Maybe that's something that, I don't know if Alex can speak to that. Maybe Redback either has a session on it, or it's something that I could certainly do something longer on if there's enough interest in it. But it's too easy. It's really my sense of it right now. And it's highly competitive because of it. I think I read, maybe it must have been about a year ago that I read that there's something like 200,000 new books going up every month worldwide through Amazon's publishing portals. That might be wrong, but it's some astronomical number. And so that tells you right then and there just the glut of written product that's out there. And, good and bad. That's great that people are getting a chance to tell their stories, but I think what we're trying to do is tell something meaningful and of a higher of the highest quality that we can. So that's certainly my bias, and that's where I'm coming from on that. So not against it, but I do think it's a whole other species, and it really does help to already have a niche market in mind when you go into that realm, because of the sheer numbers of books that are available through the digital space. So you've heard my little rules, writing is rewriting, expect writer's block and come up with something new. Discipline is everything. You need accountability partners. Those are probably the high points. Read, read in your genre and out. But of course, the number one piece of advice, and the one thing that I hope that I've helped you to do today, is start. Just start. When this webinar ends, do a little planning and write a page. Thanks, guys.
Cool. All right. Let's see here. Can I escape? Nope. We'll have to stop sharing first. Cool. Alrighty. So we don't have a huge amount of time left, but writers attending, can I have you guys, frantically type if you got questions that need addressing? And then a couple people had emailed me questions because they couldn't attend live. So I'll ask one of those while we're waiting to see if anyone live needs typing. Cool. So Miss Karyn, question for you. How do you feel about reference or craft books for novels? Like Stephen King's On Writing comes to mind. I think there's about a bajillion of them out there. Do you have?
Yeah, I have a few favorites, and actually Stephen King's is one of them. I really do. I like that one. I like John Gardner's On Becoming the Novelist. I think that's a really good book. Bird by Bird is another one that comes to mind. I think you have to find your tribe with that too. There are others that I'm less fond of. I won't call out any of those, but I think because writing is so lonely, it helps to read other people's experiences on it. So I am in favor of craft books. I just think it's a matter of finding the ones that speak to you.
Okay, cool. Awesome. And so Leah asks, first she says, thank you so much. Do you have an opinion and or advice about using Scrivener? She just bought the software.
I don't use it, so I don't really have an opinion about it. I can't really speak to it per se. I'm a straight, pretty much Word doc and Final Draft when I do script stuff. So, but I have heard good things about it. So that's as far as I could go. But I don't use it just because I got my own systems that I use right now. Yeah.
All right, cool. And then another question that somebody had sent in. Are there length restrictions on novels like there are with screenplays?
No, not on the upper end. If it's shorter than about 40,000 words, it's a novella and not a novel. So yes, in the opposite way of screenplays, it's really more that it can be too short, not too long. Yeah, there are some great books out there that are 500 pages or whatever, and so you can write as long as you want, as long as it's good.
I think I have a 900 pager sitting on my bookshelf right now. That
is that the one that you were reading when I saw you last? No, you're finished with that one.
I think I finished with that one.
Okay.
But, yeah. We'll chat about that one later. Conversation for a different day. Cool. All right. So Leah has kind of a two-parter for you. So she is asking, can you tell us a little bit about how you organize your research and notes? That's part one. Part two is specifically, how do you break down the notes you give yourself after reading your crap draft? Crap draft. Hard to say.
Okay. In terms of organizing notes, I don't know if we're talking about and research, are we talking about the research before? We're talking about research that you might do afterwards. I don't, when I'm writing fiction, I don't think I have a detailed process for it. Mm-hmm. Usually there's some research that I recently wrote a book about a kid in a juvenile detention center. And so that required me to visit one, to meet the people there, to have a sense of how all that worked, to talk to a couple police officers about how they bring the kids in. I took notes for all of that, but most of it was just listening and observing. So I didn't feel the need to make an elaborate system for that. For a nonfiction book, I would do a lot. I would have a whole system for research. That would be a different thing altogether. We're talking about fiction. So for fiction, it's usually impressions. It's what do you think? How can you use that? My own notes on my crap draft, my system for organizing that is I always have to print. I cannot do a good job at reading my own work on screen. I need to print it and see it that way. And I usually just write crap all over it in a couple different color pens. It's you circle, the typos, but when it's like, what the heck is this? Cut all of that. That might get in a green, just so I make sure that I see that. So different shades of pen, printing stuff out. That's one of the ways that I kind of keep different ideas separate. But to be honest, Leah, I think what's going to happen is when you read the craft draft, after all of the changes that you've made as you've worked your way through it, you're just going to know. It's not going to be a big deal. You're going to be like, yeah, that has to get changed. And you'll make your notes about what you want to do to it and keep going.
All right, cool. Leah says, wonderful. Thank you. Smiley face.
Good.
I added the thumbs up. That was my artistic interpretation. It seemed appropriate. Okay, cool. So Amina asks, first she says, thank you so much for this great webinar. So she wants to know, is it true that some agents read through 30 pages only to get an idea of the story and writing and then go from there? So in writing TV, people typically give us 10 pages to impress. So is that kind of like the same deal, just with different page count?
Yes, that's pretty much true. And I would argue that some of them don't read more than 5 or 10 pages. They may tell you can send 30, but it's the same thing. You got to make a killer first impression. And, I won't go on, but I basically told you the story of one of my friends who has a great 20 pages, but no rest of the book. And that's a problem. So she gets people all the time who love her first little bit, but you got to be able to deliver the rest.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So second question from Amina. How long can one expect to hear back from a publisher or agent after they submit and maybe like, oh, we loved your query, send us the first 30. You send the first 30. Is there like a standard, response time, and will they get back to you, or is it, kind of a crickets ghosting sort of situation?
Well, yeah, it can be, unfortunately. This is another entertainment industry. I don't know why it's like that other than the sheer volume of stuff that they get. The rule that I have always heard, and the agents that I have had have said, is that, you can get, after you've sent in a query, you can wait a couple of weeks and then sort of, see if there's any interest. If you don't get an answer to that, that means that they don't want to see anything else from you. If you do get yes, we'd like to see your sample, send a synopsis in 30 pages, you could wait about a month to 6 weeks and then ask, have you had a chance to look at it? Or even call the office is acceptable, and just, query about where it is in the process. Sometimes the reception person, they have elaborate tracking systems, can let you know, they've read it, they've passed, or whatever. So, and if you don't get an answer to that, then I have heard of people getting word 6 months later that something was finally read and liked. But it's safe to assume, if you haven't heard anything after about 3 or 4 months, that, you just need to move on to the next. Hopefully, I always query 10 people at a time. I don't have an agent right now. So I would query a bunch of people at the same time. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So Amina says, so thankful. Thanks so much for illuminating this. It hasn't been 6 weeks, so I guess I'm good. Haha, smiley face again. I'm adding the double thumbs up. That is my...
Good luck, Amina. Good luck.
That is my reading of the question. Okay, cool. So we're just... Oh, did somebody ask something else? Amina did do a thumbs up. See, I knew it. I knew it was the right choice.
Funny.
Oh, man. All right. So we're just about out of time. But a fun question I thought that we could end on, that a writer named Kate had sent me. Miss Karyn, do you have a favorite novel or a few favorite novels that you would recommend somebody read if they want to get into writing more commercial fiction, but, they've like just graduated from college maybe, and they've mostly been reading all of like the heavy old literature?
Well, see, I'm a big fan of heavy old literature, so there's that. Probably my favorite writer of all time is Charles Dickens. And I think I like Charles Dickens so much is because he's a commercial fiction writer of his era. Yeah. It's just really fast paced. He's got great characters. It's always a cliffhanger at the end of every chapter. I really appreciate that. And I'm still a huge fan of Stephen King for that very same reason. I think he's able to distill a character down in a very few words so that you know what this person's dilemma is.
Mhm.
And then the plot is always white knuckle. And that's what I like to read. And what I like to watch. So yeah, pretty much anything by Stephen King. It's trite, but I do like him. I like the way he does what he does.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I think I also
Michael
have
Connelly, he's a good one too. Yeah.
Oh man. All right, cool. Well, guys, that is all the time we have. Amina had said, yes, Charles is so versatile. Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed. Read the classics. Don't be afraid of the classics. Classics are classics for a reason. All right. Well, Miss Karyn, this was everything I could have ever dreamed of. And you are just a light and wonderful. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I had fun. Thanks, guys, for letting me talk your heads off for an hour and a half.
It was great. It was fantastic. I took notes. So I hope everybody else did as well, because this was a fountain of information and encouragement. So everybody, I'm going to set you all free to enjoy your Sunday. Take care. Stay safe and healthy out there. Wash your hands. And yeah, happy Sunday. And I will see you all in the next one. But thanks so much for attending.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for moderating.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.